Hi, everyone. I get asked a lot of questions a lot of the time about my advice for running Patreon pages, when you should start one, what kinds of content you should offer for your fans, how to manage a community of people who are interested in supporting your work, and meatier questions like how to balance being a person and being a commodity, whether you should do a project-based Patreon or a personal page. All of these questions are great. I often don't have time to answer them. Given that I'm stuck indoors for coronavirus quarantine right now, I said yes when I received a recent ask from an internet acquaintance of mine, Annie Bethancourt, a musician here in Portland. And we had a really lovely hour-long conversation over Zoom earlier this week. And she asked such good questions and was so generous with her personal experience and sort of workshopping her ideas that she was willing to let me record the conversation. So that is what you are going to watch right now. I really hope it answers some of your questions. If you have more queries, come and join me on Patreon. You can find me at patreon.com/Lucy Bellwood. And I'm going to start trying to do some more Q&A stuff while I'm stuck indoors because that seems like a good use of my time. So without further ado, enjoy my hour-long conversation with musician Annie Bethancourt all about Patreon.
That actually goes to one of the main questions I was going to have for you, which is something I've been struggling with, is this idea of like, how finished do you have to be in what you're offering to start?
That's a great
Um,
question.
I'd actually
Um,
love to hear like how you came to start using Patreon, how long you've been doing it, how did you decide on using that platform, and
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Why don't you introduce yourself? Because I think I probably will.
Okay.
These are great questions, and this is probably going to end up being something that will be useful to people. So if you're cool with it, I might post it. So
Yeah.
can we do
Yes,
like a fake
I'll give
introduction?
you, yeah, I'll give you like the quick rundown. So my name's
Perfect.
Annie Bethancourt. I am a singer-songwriter. I've been doing music pretty much ever since I graduated. I did my first album my senior year of college. I was with a Portland band that did a lot of tours. Uh, I did my own record label, publishing company. So it's all been like independent,
Yeah.
which has been really cool, but also really hard. And it can feel really isolating and also, surprise, surprise, financially
Challenging.
unsustainable at times. So it's so funny because I've had all these crazy cool opportunities. Like the band I was in did a Tiny Desk concert, and I opened
Ah,
for Jewel in Colorado this summer, and like,
so
these
cool.
things that, yeah, that are like really exciting, but I'm like, how do I pay my rent?
My
Like,
bills.
how do I pay my bills? But one of the
People in your life are like, oh my God, Tiny Desk. Oh my God, Jewel. Like, you're
yeah,
rich. And you're like,
yeah,
no, I'm not.
I'm famous. You're like, you're famous and I can't afford my
Does
groceries.
not equal rich.
Um, yeah, and I was, even before this whole coronavirus thing happened, I was thinking about one of the things I feel very blessed and lucky to have in my life has been like just really supportive community.
Mm,
I think from being in the music industry, and then I also randomly taught surfing in Costa Rica for a really long time, and so I met, like,
Brad.
as you do, and so I met women from all over the world, and I know a lot of people who are really supportive, and I thought, I've had really a lot of support in really big ways over the years where someone's like, oh, let me record you for free, or let me contribute. I did a Kickstarter campaign, I did all that. But from as far as like day to day making a living as an artist, I haven't
Yeah.
found anything sustainable. And so when I'd been thinking about it, and then when I saw your post about it, and I went to your Patreon, and I'm like, oh, this is so cool. I especially love how you frame it as like, this is what I'm trying to make per month to be an artist as my profession.
Sure. Yeah. That was a
Yeah.
very deliberate choice when I set the page up. Okay. This is great. This is actually a really perfect stage setting because I think you and I have a lot in common. A lot of time I'm talking to people who are maybe earlier in their creative careers. And I think there is Patreon advice for those folks just as much, but I think you're in a particularly good position for this advice to take. And I really think you should launch a Patreon. And I will tell you why.
Okay, tell me.
So
Also,
I was
I'm
very
looking at your
similar.
face, but is that weird? Like, should I be looking up here at the camera?
Oh,
Or
no, it doesn't matter. The level of
okay,
professionalism is, I have literally recorded stuff like this when I've done like Patreon interviews in the past. It's been like my phone on the dashboard of a moving car when I'm
oh
talking
my
in with my friend, and the audio quality is atrocious. So like the
God. Okay,
bar is so low.
okay, good. We're good.
This is just a question I get a lot. So I was like, oh, this might be a good idea.
Yeah.
So I have a very similar creative trajectory to you. I kickstarted my first comic in college, my senior year. Um, And that was kind of like my first foray into being a freelancer. My campaign overfunded, so I had this like nest egg to start being fully independent from the get-go. I was selling food stamps for the first, I don't know, like 4 years of my career. And it's been really interesting talking about like the unemployment benefits being extended to cover freelancers recently. And I've been like putting off delving into all of that information and trying to grapple with like the states are still trying to catch up, and Oregon's, there literally is an item in their FAQ that's like, we were just talking about this in the Exo Slack of like, oh yeah, freelancers don't qualify for this, but apply anyway. I'm like, why? Fuck you. Like, don't say that. But the information I'm receiving from other places is like, no, you can apply. So it's been an interesting flashback. It's like, oh yeah, this is my life for a number of years. And like that is part of the process for so many people, and it's something that I think deserves to be talked about more. So I had, probably like 3 years maybe of doing my own thing, maybe less actually, maybe 2, of like, I ran this Kickstarter. I was building a community of people on social media. It sounds like you have more of an established fan base to pull from, which is incredibly helpful. I think one of the things that like a Kickstarter, you can sell on a good premise with like a decent core network of people, right? I was not a famous cartoonist when I ran my first Kickstarter, but I had a well-produced video because my then boyfriend was a cinematography geek and wanted an excuse to rent fancy filming equipment. And I had a very modest goal, and so it was really easy to blow through it. And I had a supportive community of people in the social dance scene who were actually like, they were the people who funded that campaign. So that like got me in the door. I was a big fan of Kickstarter. I was at a studio. I'm still a member of this collective of cartoonists here in Portland called Helioscope. And a couple of my studio mates, I started as an intern and then eventually became a member, had been early Kickstarter adopters and had run campaigns. And a couple of them were also very early in the door at Patreon. And so I think I started my page in summer of 2014. It was actually like quite a while ago now. So it's been, I think the major differences that I have found are Patreon is definitely a slow growth model. It's kind of like the retirement investment account of financial models, where like you're not going to see the same kind of, if you're accustomed to Kickstarter, explosive growth of like, everybody gives me their money and everything is great. It's like, oh, I made $5 more this month than I made the previous month. But I will say that when I go and look at my overall chart of earnings over time, well, don't look at it quite right now because it's starting to go down again, but the overall trend, much like a retirement account, if you look at it in years, not months, is up and to the right. So I think we may see a change in that. And part of me is like, one of the things I struggle with talking about Patreon with other people is that I do harbor this like paranoia in the back of my mind that being early in the door was a more important factor than any specific thing I've done with my page. Like, I think that's always a concern of, is this just a product of my page is doing well because I've been on the platform for a long time? But I think I did some things when I first set it up that were important to me. I explicitly wanted to establish exactly what you're talking about, a sustainable income stream that was not tied to any particular singular project, because it sounds like you've done stuff on your own, you've done stuff with your band, like you're in an environment where you might be taking on all different kinds of projects, and like what people in your network want to support, and it sounds like we have a similar relationship with our fans, is that like they want to support you, the person. And as a performer, I would imagine that you're not super uncomfortable with the notion of people just like supporting you, the entity, because that's kind of part of being like a public person. Some folks are not so comfortable with that, and that's okay if you're in that.
I'm not great at it. I feel like this is almost a practice in me being like, I gotta do this, because I swear, even when I've done, so I'm a writer as well. So I do a weekly newsletter and I do art projects, but like I had 2 things. I had a friend who told me, he knew I did music and I talked to him about it. And then he came and saw me with this other girl who also was a musician. And he was like, you blow her out of the water live, but the way that she talks about and presents herself, like when you told me that you did music, I didn't think it was good the way that you talked about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Valuable feedback, also devastating.
And then the other thing I noticed is that like I don't, it's so weird as an artist to feel like you completely believe that what you have to offer is valuable, but you don't almost feel guilty if someone values it, or you don't expect someone to value it. So like I am so proud of my CDs, and I like am so proud of the music that I've written, but like at shows when people buy them, I'm almost always like, thank you. I hope you like it. I mean, if not, let me know and I'll give you back your money. You know,
I give you your money back with interest. Like, it's okay.
So I feel like Patreon is almost like because I'm kind of to a point where I'm like, I think we all are nervous that people are going to think we're taking advantage of people, or we're being a leech to society,
Sure.
or we're like being a freeloader or whatever. And I think I'm finally to the point where I'm like, I have to believe the people who are telling me that they value what I do, and I have to just put a number to that and try and like.
Absolutely. And this is like, I think this is going to be, it's a really nice thing to think about, that Patreon is like a form of therapy. It certainly has been for me when it comes to, I think the work that I've been doing through Patreon has been more to do with disentangling my sense of productivity and my sense of self-worth and my sense of like whether I deserve to be supported by people who love me. And what has been useful about this is that explicitly, because I didn't set my page up as a per creation thing, and from early on, I don't know if when I first launched the page, no, I think I did. I initially set it up, like if you go look back through my previous goals that have already been met, it was like $20 a month pays for my Wi-Fi, you know, or like whatever. I broke it down to really, really small increments. And I think part of that at the time, I was like very hard on this train of, I want people to understand how much it costs to live, because I think, and that number can be different for everybody. And as I have aged and my expenses have gone up, I feel less comfortable about it. Like now the work I'm doing is, can I talk about being, I don't necessarily want to say a mid-career artist because that's a weird nebulous term, but like I am not a noob anymore. I've been at this for a while. And so now the metrics of success are less like, am I struggling to make rent every month? And they're more like, how am I saving for retirement? And I feel this sense of like guilt around being able to talk about that openly. And I think that's kind of the next, it might be something to do in quarantine, honestly, to write a more robust recap post for finances and talk about like the years where things go a little bit better and what you might do, because it's good to plan for the best and for the worst. But yeah, when I set the page up, I was like, okay, my goal with this page is to establish exactly what you're talking about, a steady stream of income that's not project dependent. Because ultimately, I think we as creators understand, and hopefully the people who support us do too, that freedom from money stress equals better creative output. But it can get this sort of horrible Ouroboros-like quality when you're like, but I must create output in order to generate money to make the thing. And it has
or it's
been
very like transaction oriented.
Exactly. Kickstarter is totally like that. And it's like,
which in
it's
some
good for
ways
some
is
stuff.
good, because
totally.
like with my Kickstarter, I really made sure to make the language be about like, this is a pre-sale. Like you're not being a philanthropist to give me $20 for my CD now. Like, because
and that's way more.
But I actually want to go the other way.
People.
I think like with Patreon, I want it to be, I'm kind of expanding this idea of especially how patrons used to be. It wasn't like patrons of the arts weren't because like, oh, you know, I want to have this art for me to consume and have in my home. Like, well, I have the means to give, and I believe this art is valuable to the community. And so I'm going to commit this amount, you know, this money.
And it depends. Like if you set up a Patreon page, and some people do that are very like, some people use Patreon in a super transactional way. And I don't think there is anything wrong with that. But I think you are rightfully identifying a growth edge that you want to pursue here, which is like, I want to get more comfortable acknowledging my own worth and having that like reflected back to me by people. Because it's a huge thrill when someone gives you money on Kickstarter and you're like, holy shit, you believe in my work, but like with dollars, which is an insane compliment. And in Patreon, land. I think most of the growth that I've done around this, or like the lessons that I've learned, honestly have all happened because of ways that patrons have spoken to me. Like, it's not even so much that I got more comfortable with it. It was that 10 people told me I was drunk, and so I laid down eventually. You know, it was like time after time, people would be like, I'm just giving you money because I support your work. I'm just giving you money because I support your work. Like, you don't have to make anything. I'm just happy to be here. And there's one of my patrons, Marty Chitterek, who is like a genuine, actual gem of a human being, and is doing such good work in this realm, patronizes a bunch of people. And on his little profile page on Patreon, it explicitly says, like, if I am supporting you, I do not care about whatever you send me. Like, I care deeply about you as a person and your work, and I think it's great, but like, I am just here to try and make your life easier. Please accept this money.
That's really great. Yeah.
That's like, and I think you see it time and time again too. If you go to other people's Patreon pages, 90% of creators are posting being like, hi everyone, I'm so sorry I'm late delivering this thing, and I didn't. And 90% of comments are people being like, don't worry about it, take care of yourself, like, take a break, we're here for you. You know, it's like, really, I have yet to find a space on the internet that is more mutually supportive, but also mutually mired in this like self-abnegating anxiety. And my goal for people using Patreon, or like my hope, is that through that process of accepting help from people who want to make your life a little easier and allow you more space to explore, that you can start to kind of unpick some of that narrative. So
I didn't even think about it that way, but that's really cool. I mean, it makes sense.
In hindsight, that's kind of what's happened for me. And it has been hard and weird. I will say, like, when I go back and look, so in 2014, when I started the page, I was young and full of energy. Unlike now, where I'm slightly older and slightly less full of energy. But I was delivering these like illustrated weekly updates, you know, these like huge image collages, and I was doing like 6 freelance gigs at a time and turning in all this stuff and being like, I worked on these pages and I colored this thing and I did this and I did this. And I was, when I look back on it, like driving myself in the name of like, produce, you know, like, prove that I'm worth something. And now I think the community of people that has sprung up, my hunch is, and I've actually, you know, I've really been wanting to do this. I want to run a poll or like have an open thread and just be like, can y'all tell me, like, what do you value about being here? Because I spend so much time guessing, and I realize that Patreon is a space where you can actually just ask people and they'll probably tell you. And I'll be curious to see what the answers are to that, because I think part of it is educational. Like, a lot of the time people on Patreon are looking for a more personal connection. And I don't necessarily mean that in like a creepy parasocial way, just in a like, there is a level of trust that's established in that community that is backed with financial validation, where it's like, a rando would not sign up to give you $5 a month for the purpose of shitting all over your nascent ideas, right? And like, if they did, they're probably a rich asshole. But like, it just weeds out
if that's the case.
So much garbage. It's like the Metafilter thing, right? Like, you pay your $5 one-time membership fee, and that just like automatically cuts your troll level down so much. Because
I
people
didn't think
just, like,
about it that way either. But
they don't want to pay money.
Yeah.
So the people that I talk with on Patreon, oh, and this is something that is maybe changing, but on the whole, I find pretty true. Commenting or like active conversation engagement numbers on Patreon are also not always super strong. If I get like 5 comments on a post, I'm like, oh my God, it's blowing up. But it's not a real, it's not always a super active space. And I have started to cultivate a more active comment section, and I'm deeply excited about it because, and that really changed, I think, when I started doing audio rambles about what I was up to, maybe just because it's more personal. But a lot of the stuff that people have responded to really positively on my Patreon has just been me speaking candidly about the behind the scenes aspect of running this career. So when I started out, I was posting this weekly update of all the work I was doing, which was fun and good. But I feel like every time, I mean, when I spoke at XOXO and I like opened up in front of all these people about how much money I wasn't making, I had a huge spike in patronage. And it, like, when I look at the graph, that was for a while the single biggest jump in a month. And it was really just a product of like, oh, I wrote about what this is like, you know, and I think people are looking for candid, heartfelt information just about what it's like for you. I think there are enough people out there in the world who run blogs or write books that are like, I'm like young entrepreneur so-and-so, and I'm here to tell you how to do this thing, or like 5 steps to becoming a successful indie musician on Patreon. And I'm really very uninterested in content like that, because it's just, it feels prescriptive and weird. But I think and you don't have to be, I think there's also something about that content that is like, I'm giving you value and you're lucky to be here. And if it is more comfortable for you to think about just speaking honestly to your experience, like if you are in that position where people buy your album at shows and you're like, oh God, like that is, people want to hear about that. Like they genuinely do, because I think it's so easy. I mean, I just did it at the start of this conversation. I was like, you're a musician, you don't deal with this. And you're like, excuse me, yes, I do. I think that's really, I think that's like a really valid thing to share. And
yeah, that's really
hard
helpful,
and weird.
because I think I wouldn't have thought about it, even, you know, asking you to have this conversation. I wouldn't have thought like, oh, this is the aspect that it's going to make it makes sense, because essentially people want connection. You know, we're dying for like,
absolutely, especially now, more so than ever.
Yeah. But I almost viewed it as something I could do to drive my productivity. And I do, I want to create, but I also want to be able to like pay my rent as I'm doing the creating that I'm already doing, you know, but,
and
I
that's
never
a good
thought
point
about that from the perspective of like, it's not just the art that people are supporting, it's the person. And so they want to know the person, and they want to like hear stories about it. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. That's really
helpful. 2 things from that. One is it's, I have spent the last 2 years being more the person than the productivity. And it has been a very uncomfortable time for me on Patreon, because I am noticing that like impulse of like, I'm making more than I've ever made from this service before. And it really, like, I was trying to pinpoint where in the earnings structure. I think when I first launched, I had enough people who were like solidly in my corner that my initial bump of launching the page was about $300. And then from there, it kind of crept up, you know, $10 a month or whatever, slowly but surely. And now it's somewhere, I've just had a couple larger patrons who have to drop pledges. And that like, that's the trade-off too, I think. Well, I'll talk about tier structures in a minute, because I think there's some interesting, I have learned a lot again from my patrons. They basically bullied me into making a higher tier so they could give me more money. And I was like, no, I don't want it. That's too many dollars. And they're like, let us give you $50. Like, okay. Which is still mind boggling to me. Like I can't, anyway, we'll talk about that. But I was trying to think about like where the money went from being, oh, this is a handy, boost each month, right? Like it's nice to have an extra $300. It doesn't pay my rent, but it's like a big chunk of it, versus now where I'm like, this is my paycheck. And I mean, like literally right now in the middle of the COVID pandemic, it's like, this is it. And if it were not for this, I would be a lot more stressed. And I think that's a good way to think about it when you're asking about like, how prepared do you need to be when you're launching a page? This is the biggest difference between Kickstarter and Patreon, is that Kickstarter is all about limited timeline, reward structure, meticulous spreadsheets. If you're like a weird overachiever like me, like pricing everything out within an inch of its life, planning for every eventuality, ironclad FAQ, whatever, all that stuff. A Patreon, on the other hand, there is no time limit. You can reinvent it as many times as you want. Like you could literally launch it tomorrow and tell nobody and just say like, you can noodle around with it and send it to people whose opinions you trust and be like, what do you think of this? Like,
yeah, so that's so helpful. And that's what I was wondering is like, you know, obviously you want to give something quality to the world, but I find that I think artists tend to just be like, this is good. No, it's garbage. Actually, maybe it's okay. Actually, it's crap. You know, you kind of just go.
Yeah.
So it's like really hard to like complete something that you feel confident enough in to ask for support with it. But so you would recommend just kind of like getting it started. And
I would, yeah. I mean, I think the things that are important to say on a Patreon page, there are some similarities. And if you've run a Kickstarter, I think there are some translatable skills, and then there are just some things that it's good to remember that the two are distinct. I think on an intro page, it's a good idea to introduce yourself, like to let people know who you are, and to let them know what your goals are. And I think I state pretty explicitly on my page that I'm like, I am figuring a bunch of stuff out. And like, if you want to come along for the ride, like get in. But I rewrote that like for the longest time from 2014 to like a year ago, maybe. The copy was the same. And it was just like a bunch of stuff about like, here's the kind of work I've made in the past. Here are some things that I've done. I think being really candid about why you're on Patreon is like, I'm here because despite having had all these amazing professional opportunities, I'm still a musician who struggles to pay her rent. And I would like to start building a financial foundation that will allow me to be sustainable and to make creative work that I can share with a community of people who are passionate about what I do. And like that creates a space to welcome people in. It's honest about your circumstances without being overly self-deprecating.
Can I just write that down and have that be?
Absolutely. Yes. Plagiarize. I stole so much. That's the other thing I would say, like look at other people's pages. I don't know in musician land. I feel like my understanding of all the music people I know on Patreon is that they're actually, many of them are doing per creation pages, or it's more, there's a clearer deliverable there.
Yeah,
like,
I don't think
every
I'm
time I
gonna
make
do
a music
that.
video, every new song, like I don't do that.
Yeah, no, because also I am not self-produced. Like I work
Right.
with producers, and so I can't just like, I mean, I could make a little a video of a song or do a cover of a song, but also I want to I've been kind of transitioning into writing and, and music. So being able to do
Yeah.
both, or even just to be like, this week I want to, because I did this like artistic collage project with postcards where I would like randomly make a postcard every day, and then I'd put like a stream of consciousness fortune on the back, and then pick people from a randomized list and send it to them. So, just being able to like do stuff like that instead of like,
that's another good
here
thing to
is a
talk
music
about.
video, because I am a musician,
Yeah, it's not that. And that's what I love too. That's the other thing that's been kind of like the thing you talked about earlier that was the second thing I wanted to touch on was creating a container that helps generate income from work you're doing anyway. And I think that's a really good thing to know going into Patreon, is that people are like, oh my gosh, but like you've committed to so much stuff and there's all these things. And I'm like, well, the things I promised on my page when I launched, it was like weekly updates at the $2 tier. Then I think I made a folder of PDFs. And again, as a musician, you're in a great opportunity here where like I built a Dropbox where people can just like get PDFs of all my stuff for free if they sign up for $5 a month. And that's like, for digital comics, I'm less concerned. Piracy affects different industries differently. So like you can use your judgment for what works best for you. But if you have digital content that doesn't cost you anything to produce, and it's already been made, giving that to people as a reward is a really nice thing to do. And then I think I had a $10 tier. Yeah, when I first launched, I had 10 $10 slots where I would write you a postcard every month. And that sold out really quickly. And then I did it for, I don't know, a couple of years probably. And those spots were really popular. And eventually those were the people who were like, more money though, let us give you more money. And I'm like, you can just up your pledge. And they're like, no, we want the bigger tier, make a bigger tier. So eventually, and that made sense because like between Patreon's cut, postage, the time it actually turns out it takes a lot of time to write 10 postcards a month. I wasn't really making very much money from my top tier offering.
Yeah.
But now I have, as I expanded it, now I have this $15 level where I make a PDF of all my sketchbook work from every month. That's probably the most labor intensive thing I do. I don't do it every month. And the months that I don't do it, I have not yet had a single person being like, hey, where's my thing? Like, I want this thing. It's mostly, it's nice when it gets done and it doesn't matter when it doesn't. But the thing that's really important about that is that I already draw in my sketchbook, or aspire to be drawing in my sketchbook more than I already am. And so making that PDF every month is a really good reminder of like, hey, like you care about drawing in your sketchbook. And if I fall off the wagon and I don't do it, it's not a big deal. But the benefit to that is that at the end of each calendar year, I have already scanned and formatted all of my sketchbook work from the year, and then I can make that into a PDF and sell it on Gumroad or whatever and generate a little bit of extra income for the year or whatever. So like I think you're totally on the money, that stuff that you're already doing, and especially mail art. My friend Bethancourt has one of the most lovely Patreons, because they do a lot of stuff. They do installation art and comics and graphic novels and like performance pieces, and have been experimenting with a lot of mail-based stuff. Sarah Merck, another Portlander, I just got today this quarantine, which is a quarantine zine from her. She just did a project where she did 365 little foldy 6-page, 8-page zines over the course of a year, and turned them into a book. And so like all of her patrons are getting a copy of that book, and the care package she just sent for the hell of it to Patreon supporters has like a seed packet in it and a postcard you can decorate. And like, I don't know, I'm on a big mail kick right now, but anything Patreon allows, I think when you set up backer levels, you can, or patron levels, you can indicate if somebody signs up at this tier, they need to give you an address. And sending out mailings to Patreon people is so fun. And it's like a really rewarding
Unless
process.
The lady at the post office yells at you.
Unless lady at the post office yells at you. It's really my poor mail carrier who keeps coming in every day. I'm just like cranking through this list of people who volunteered addresses to me on Twitter, and I've sent like, I don't know how many pieces of mail now. But every day our outgoing mailbox is just bursting with stuff. Yeah. And it's been really fun. It's like, it's super nice to know that you can brighten someone's day by sending stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I think sending mail is great. And if you're somebody, that's something that has been amazing about Patreon for me, is that I have not really been posting comics for a long while. And like nobody has, you can see exit surveys when people drop their patronage. 90% of the time it's people saying, oh, my financial situation changed. You know, I had intended to pledge for a couple of months and now I've got to go support somebody else or whatever, which is totally fine. And there is fluctuation every month. I think that's something important to know, that like you will see your numbers wobble quite a bit. I think the net gain each month is usually like 2 to 5 people. But that's often like I'll gain 6 and lose 4, you know? So most of the time people leaving is a product of their financial circumstance. It's very, very rarely that I will get a piece of feedback that's like, oh, this creator didn't do what I expected them to do, or like the rewards I got were not to my liking, or like whatever. It's very rare though, because I think people are trained to behave that way on Kickstarter, where they're like, I didn't get my book, you know? And here it's like, I didn't get my dimensional human being who is obviously growing and learning at their own pace in public. Like, it's a much harder deliverable, right? Yeah. So it sounds like you have a lot of stuff that you're enjoying exploring, and I think Patreon would be a great fit for where you're at, because you have, on the one hand, a group of people who love you and want to support you, and on the other hand, a variety of avenues that you want to explore. And I love the idea of Patreon as a space for supporting exploration rather than like a commerce-driven engine.
Yeah. And then this is so helpful. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad we're recording it too. I literally have been meaning to do a post about this for a long time. So this is, and that's another thing. Like so when I made the higher tier, and this is, recently I got an email from Patreon and they were like, hey, we're trying to encourage people to do away with the $1 tier. Because I think now it's like I have 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, and 50, which is probably too many tiers. It would be nice to simplify them. But they've done a bunch of research into like having a base $2 tier means it's more likely people will, like if someone would pledge at $1 a month, they'll probably pledge at $2 a month. And it's easier to take that away. So I'm trying to figure out what to do about that. But having maybe like 3 tiers, you know, one that's like your basic $2, one that's a fancier $10, where you're like, I don't know, I'll post audio recordings of songs. Like I think being able to share work in progress, people really love being able to see. I know like as a non-musician, I'm fascinated by that. It's just like, what are the stages that you go through? How do you write song? How does song? Like, how does that work? And I think also tapping your network. So the thing I started doing when I expanded my tier offerings was recognizing that I have a lot of conversations like this with people in my life, other creators, where I'm like, this is probably going to be useful to somebody. I should record this, if everyone's comfortable with it. And so I generated this list of, I don't know, there were probably like 10 episodes. And it wasn't just cartoonists. Like I interviewed my yoga teacher. I interviewed like writer friends and, just tried to pull in conversations that I would have been having anyway. And I didn't get precious about it. It wasn't like, okay, now I have to invest in recording equipment. Now I have to, it was just like, I'm going to use the audio, voice memo on my phone. I'm going to put it on a table. We're going to talk, and then I'm going to put it up. And like, the nice thing about that stuff is that it's evergreen, right? Like you can make a list of audio recordings and be like, if you become my patron, you get access to this Dropbox folder or wherever you put them. And it's like, people can then go listen to that, or you can release it publicly and it becomes content that other people can derive value from. And if they do derive value from it, then they might be like, oh, I want to support this person on Patreon because like they gave me something that was useful to me. And that I think is, that feels like a more sure bet, I guess, in my career. Like I have a hunch that more people have supported me because I have created content that they have found useful than people who have found my content emotionally revelatory or resonant. Like I mean, I don't know for sure.
It's hard for me too, because I'm definitely more emotionally accessible than I am functionally instructive.
Yeah. And that's like, it's totally a function of, I love teaching. I love sharing, stuff like this with other people. And like, that works particularly well for me. There are plenty of creators who are like, absolutely not. You want me to put my face on camera on the internet to talk to people about how I'm working? Like, no, thank you. I'm good. Which is completely fine. Like, I think if you're just sharing stuff about your creative process, that is still helpful to people. But it's maybe better to consider like, what is most helpful for you? Like, what are the parts of your creative practice right now that you are looking to nurture or bolster or support?
I'm gonna write that down. Yeah, that's super helpful. It's something I really resonated with what you said earlier, which is like, make it something that you're already doing or that you're aspiring to be doing.
Right.
Asking that question, like what?
Because if there's stuff about, I think it's so much, it is hard to do this. And I feel like I'm speaking as much to myself as to anybody else here, that like, I often try to preemptively guess what people want to see from me on the internet and then give them that. And that never goes well. Like it just is a one-way ticket to delivering work that you are not passionate about and your audience can tell your heart isn't in, and it's just like not a good scene. And when I have given myself permission to be like, you know what? I'm fucking sick of writing educational blog posts. I've burned out on this. I was on tour for an entire year and I'm so tired and I don't want to talk about promotion anymore. I'm just going to ramble for 20 minutes about what I'm up to. And that's like rapidly become my favorite thing about my Patreon. And now I opened up this Dropbox and people are starting to post their own voice memos in return. And it's like, it just, I don't know. I'm starting to see this trajectory of having gone through an experience of being super self-driven and outward oriented and like looking to build this ascendant career, and then reaching a point of visibility that was success and being like, ooh, I'm in the success zone now. And then being like, this is not what I wanted it to be. And then like trying to change the narrative around that, and then touring and getting really burnt out. And now like moving into a space where I just want to talk to other people. And then moving into a space where I don't just want to talk at other people. I want to talk to other people and then listen to other people, which is really just like the process of being human, right? You learn over time to become more communicative and empathetic, hopefully. And now I think, especially in the midst of all the this is like disentangled from whatever's going on globally, but contextualized through that lens too. I think there's this element right now where I'm like, I want to shut up. Like, I want to hear other people tell me about what's going on with them. And to that end, I've been thinking more about like maybe doing Q&As or having like community conversation live streams or something. But I think treating a Patreon as a community hub is a nice way to think about it, instead of, because it's not this like faceless cash cow that you're just sort of milking to like get your monthly sustenance. There is a really special ecosystem there of people who care about you, and are just kind of along for the ride. And like, I think there's a lot of permission in that space. And so
Yeah, and something
no, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, just with related to what you were saying about listening, like I think something I've been thinking about for a while is how to make it kind of collaborative. I mean, it's probably similarly for you, but as a songwriter, there's so many songs that I've written about someone else's experience, or even that I've written and I've been like, I have no idea where this came from. It's not my experience, but so I'm curious about incorporating like what you're saying, where you're asking people to give the audio back, like how it would be to create more elements of the tears, where it was like more collaborative, like yeah.
And I've always
that
been
sounds
very
awful
shy.
To be like, if you pay me more money, I will pay more attention to what you have to tell me.
No, seriously, that's a really uncomfortable thing to grapple with. I know, but like, that is how the internet is structured for so many of us, is like, people are willing and like game to do that. It's not that they're going to be like, wow, who does she think she is? Like $50 a month and you get to Skype with me for an hour. Big whoop. Like, there are people who are really excited about that. And like, especially as somebody with your level of experience, like, you are a professional and what you have to offer is valuable. And that doesn't have to be sold as a commodity. But it's more like higher tiers entitle people to, be on your mailing list, and you're going to mail them a physical letter. Or maybe you're going to send them like, and I think there are ways to kind of ameliorate this, right? Xing does something that I think is very clever, where they use like an automated mailing service where you upload a spreadsheet of addresses and then it like prints something and just mails it out from a third party. So Xing isn't handwriting 50 letters. I think the upshot of that experiment was that it was a little too expensive to do sustainably, but there's stuff like that where like, maybe you, like Sarah did a nice letter where like everybody who got the Patreon care package got a handwritten letter. This is photocopied, but it's still the experience of like, wow, a person wrote this to me, and that's, I don't feel like I was denied value because I'm like, Sarah didn't handwrite this letter.
Yeah.
How dare she? The Rumpus does a really nice program like this called, I think it's just Letters in the Mail is the name of the program. But they tap different writers and illustrators to do a handwritten letter once a month. And you subscribe for $5 a month, and then you get a copy of the letter. And it's like, they get, like Roxane Gay, like
so cool.
big name writers to do it. And I did one for them a couple of years ago that was like an illustrated letter about visiting my godmother's house, and got so many letters back, which was incredibly cool. Like, that was amazing. There were people, because they require you to have a return address, and it can be a PO box or, an office. You don't have to.
This is a good technical question. Do you have a PO box? Yeah, I need to.
I don't. Probably should.
Okay. I just am nervous. I had a stalker like way back in the day.
Ooh, yeah, no. Yeah.
Which sounds more cool maybe to some people. It's like, I had a stalker, but no, it was, I'm worried about putting my address out.
That leaves a mark.
It was just, I mean,
I think if you have like a nearby post office that is convenient for you, it's totally not a bad idea to open a PO box. And I think it also like opens you up to a lot of joyous serendipity if you can then, without anxiety, publish that far and wide and be like, hey, I just opened a PO box. Do you want to send me something? And like, I did that. There's a newsletter writer whose work I really enjoy, who puts her PO box at the end of every newsletter and is like, I love mail. It's my love language. If you want to mail me something, do it here. And I've written to her multiple times just being like, wow, I could, like, this is going to brighten somebody's day. Like, this is my random act of kindness. Usually if I'm dealing with, and I've been a little more lax about it with this Twitter address thing, I try to use my best judgment, right? If I'm like, oh, this person seems to have like a verifiable identity, and this is something I would assess as a safe interaction, I'll put my return address. What I will do often is I will put my studio's address, because that's a publicly searchable place that I go relatively frequently, and is safe. There are other people there. I wouldn't feel threatened if someone showed up. It's a little trickier right now because we're all in quarantine and I'm not going to the studio, but yeah, generally I'm not like publishing my home address online for everybody to see. I think I do have the studio's address on my website, but I think getting a PO box is kind of a fun, cool thing to do. Honestly, and I should probably get one.
Maybe we could share one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go on that one with a friend. That's a great idea, actually. Especially if people are just going to be sending you letters and you're not receiving like packages or anything. Yeah. What else? Your initial question was so jam-packed with valuable queries. I'm trying to think if there's anything I haven't covered. Oh, videos. People get really anxious about making a video. Same deal with Kickstarters. You can absolutely soft launch your Patreon page without a video. I think if you're uncomfortable with the idea of appearing on like as the face of your Patreon page, it is not necessary. If you don't want to have to write out a whole thing, I think it's totally legit to just be like, oh, like my name's Annie. Read below this video to learn what my Patreon page is all about. Thanks so much for coming. Guitar chord, and then like you're out. You know, you don't have to do the whole spiel in the video if you don't want to. But I think it's really nice to at least have like a photo of you or some kind of image. I've definitely seen people try and launch Patreon pages that are not project. If they're project based, that's fine. But if you're talking about a page that's designed to support you, the person, I've seen a shocking number of page drafts where it's like there's no indication who you, the person, is, and so you don't want to give people that sense of like, oh, I want to support this person, but like, who am I supporting? So as much as you are comfortable giving people a bit of a glimpse into like, who is this person?
Yeah, I think I just wore with, I don't have any problem communicating that or being the face, like you said. I think I'm more have a tendency to feel like, well, my video quality isn't good and I don't edit. So I'm, I can't put like cool little pew pew graphics or whatever. So
I think, well, I mean, this is something you probably do have access to. Like you have a good microphone, presumably. Maybe. And if you don't, I can sanitize mine and leave it on my porch for you if you want. I'm serious.
I
like,
do, I think.
Do it like you're assembling a heist, right? Like if you have friends who do film stuff, or if you know someone with like a DSLR, they can shoot totally good video, and just say like, hey, could I borrow this for an afternoon?
Or I think something that I really valued that you said at the beginning of the conversation is this idea that it's like, and that it's constantly evolving and you can always change it. I think that's a really helpful perspective to have. I actually I do copywriting as well, also to make income. And that's a thing I always talk to my clients about, like, because people are like, well, I want my website to be, and you're like, the copy you use now might be different from the copy you're going to use a year from now, and just, I think having that quality is really helpful, especially for perfectionism. Cause you're just like, okay, well, I'll just do this now. And good is, what do they say? Done is better than good. Yeah. Done is better than good. So
yeah. And like I had the same video from 2014 to like 2018, late 2018, because I just could not be arsed to do it again. I was like, it was such a pain in the butt. And like, it was kind of hokey, but I guess it still got the job done. I also have no data about like how many people, I know with friends' Kickstarter campaigns, for example, it's very rare that I watch videos on Kickstarter. Usually it's just like, if a friend is recommending a thing, I go back it. Or if it's a friend's project and I want them to succeed, I back it. I don't do a lot of like window shopping on Patreon or on Kickstarter where I'm cruising around and I'm like, what's this? This looks interesting. But I was really relieved when I finally updated my video. And that, again, was like another EXO person, Chris Higgins. I got in touch with him because I know he does film stuff. And he very generously let me invade his living room. And we spent an afternoon putting a video together. And it can be fun to involve your friends in that process if you need a little bit of like external accountability for putting together the bits and pieces that make up a page.
Yeah, I'll probably do that when the world stops ending.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I'm not sure, like, what are your primary methods of communication with your fan base? Do you feel like you
Oh
have
yeah,
everyone on a mailing list? Like, what's your ecosystem like? Where are
yeah,
your people?
that was a question I was going to ask you. I do not I had a mailing list like way back in the day. I haven't done it
Sure.
probably since like 2009 or 10. Like it's been
Yeah.
so long. Facebook is like a way, although I must have been sooner than that because my last Kickstarter was in 2013. So
Okay.
but yeah, still that was such a long time ago. Things have changed so much. But
I
that
know,
was
it's
going to be my
wild.
question to you. So right now what I'm doing is I put a lot of music up on Facebook. I actually put a lot of music and writing projects on Instagram. And
Cool.
then I have a newsletter that is kind of like an emotion based, like processing, like kind of like Anne Lamott, like
Mm-hmm.
meets David Sedaris, like memoir-y style processing of emotional shit that I do
Yeah,
like every
awesome. God,
week.
that's the shit I love. I subscribe to so
Yeah.
many of those and I love them. And it's all, I mean, I was just talking to someone about this, that like I have been subscribing to RSS feeds again for the first time and actually ever. I think back when Google Reader was a thing, I was just reading things from bookmarks. But recently, another XOXO person, Matt Bogart, was on his Patreon talking about how he's been using a feed reader and he's really excited to be like subscribing to people's blogs again, and people are starting to blog again. And so I went looking and I was like, oh, I should add some feeds to this. And I added a bunch of stuff. And then I was like, all of these bloggers are men. Where are my women? Where are my non-men voices in this? And I mentioned it to someone and they were like, everyone has a newsletter. Like that's all of the women and non-binary folks and trans folks, like it's everyone's in newsletter land. Men are
It's
blogging.
interesting because I want to do both. I did blog for a really long time.
Yeah.
And then I had a friend, you know, I was kind of wrestling with, it's called the Anagram. And I'm like, I just
Such a
don't
good
know.
name. Oh, wow. Okay. That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't know if I want to just, you know, maybe I should move this to a blog. And she's like, no, there's something about like getting it to you that it feels like what you're talking about, like with the intimate aspect of like the mail.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, this is for you, to your inbox.
And there are ways
So
you can play
yeah.
with that. Like another XOXO person, Christina Tran, has a thing that I talk about on my Patreon all the time, that she's been playing with this blog that is a twine game, like a text-based click linked post game. And so it's not a like scrolling blog. It's this slightly disrupted space where you can interact with her thought process in a more branching kind of framework. And I love it because it feels, again, I think there's something about blogging that is inherently like, I have an opinion and everybody should be listening to my opinion. And there is something about a newsletter that's much more, right, you're like blowing your bugle. And I do blog on Patreon, but this is something to consider. And it's something I've really been wrestling with is like, I think, is this I can't remember which productivity writing person wrote about this. I want to say it was Cal Newport who wrote that book, Deep Work.
I love Cal Newport. Yeah.
Yeah. Is he the one who talks about the theory of some benefit? Is that him? That like humans are really good at holding on to things that are mostly good or somewhat good, but we're very bad at letting them go. And this happened to me with social media, where I was like, well, Tumblr isn't my most productive platform, but like 20 people reliably follow me there. So like I can't abandon those 20 people so I can devote more energy to this other platform where I have 10,000 followers. That would make no sense. Both of these things are some benefit, but like cumulatively, it's attrition of energy. And so what would probably be more productive is for me to cut my losses, get off a platform that's not really doing it for me, and go somewhere that is. And that's the thing that's been holding me back from blogging, I think, is that like I am having much higher quality interactions with people on Patreon. And I've kind of been pouring all of my like blog and newsletter energy into my Patreon sphere. It makes the most sense to me. I'm like, this is the space where if people encounter something and they like it, it's very easy for them to immediately give me money.
Yeah, but I think that makes sense because it's almost like a funnel. You know, it's like I
Right,
agree with, you know, I do think that there are certain, like, for example, when you were talking about on your page having the video and the writing, like, I think that there are different people. If I'm like, how do I blah, 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 and a video comes up, I don't want to watch that video. I want to read about it. I want to be able to scan an article about how to do the thing I want to do. I don't want to watch this video where they're like, hey guys, I had soup with my grandma today. But then I'm just like, oh God, fuck, just tell me how to do the thing. But there are some people
make a tortilla soup.
there are some people who love that. Like, they want to watch the video.
Yeah,
they don't want to read. So I think having both, because you're meeting those two groups, is helpful. And then I think, a blog is essentially you're funneling into the Patreon, it seems like, or maybe with the newsletter. I guess that was a question I had for you, because so I don't really have a blog presence right now on my new web page. And I want to start doing that. And I want to start doing like a newsletter that's more like, it's more concise. It's more a business newsletter instead of like
that's what I've been using mine for. One. Yeah. It was like work announcements.
Yeah. So is Patreon, do you have a newsletter and Patreon?
So currently, so here's the like ecosystem as it stands currently. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, which are, I would say, my two most active social media places. And that's like where they're pretty comparable right now. I think I'm about 10,000 followers on each. And for a long time, Instagram trailed behind Twitter considerably. And then I did my last book, which was a 100-day project. And that got a lot of 100-day project community traction. And so I like had a big explosive follower surge, and now they're kind of equal. I was on like at one point I did the math, and I had like 11 different channels that I had to update every time I blew my nose, and I was like, I can't do this. This is too much. So organically, now that I'm not actively promoting a book or touring or something, I'm not using my Facebook fan page anymore at all. I don't use my personal Facebook at all. So that's kind of withered and atrophied. Tumblr is kind of a ghost town, so I'm not really there anymore. And then I have my personal newsletter, which I used to send once a month. And it was a mix. I never really defined it. I wasn't like, this is a 10 things I found inspirational newsletter, or this is a rambly memoir newsletter. It was just sometimes one, sometimes the other. Sometimes it was, I'm on tour, here's 10 places you can find me this week. It was very like businessy. And I've just stopped writing that for the last, I think I've written one update every 6 months. And I really don't know. I've considered it. I've considered saying like, hey, like, I am not using this very much right now. If you want to get more from me, you can become a patron, or you can just sign up to follow me on Patreon. That's something I should point out. You can have followers on Patreon just like you can on any other website. I think it's a kind of undersung feature of the platform, because if you make a post that is not behind any kind of paywall, which I honestly recommend, I think part of this deprogramming of commodity-based creator infrastructure is like, okay, there are tiers, and like you do get certain perks at different tiers, but most of them, what's the meat and potatoes, the bread and butter, the food stuff and other food stuff, stuff that I'm posting, if I'm comfortable with it being available widely on the internet, I'm just making it free, because like the more people who can find that and find it useful or valuable or emotionally resonant, the more likely they are to become patrons. Like, people can't support you if they don't know who you are. And if all your best stuff is behind a paywall, that I think is a hard thing for me to remember, is like, if I'm posting stuff to Patreon, I have to go tell people on other platforms that I'm doing it.
And this was a question I had for you too. Right when you started it back in the day, how did you first cultivate your base? Like, did you go to all these other websites to say, hey, because that's my thought right now is like, I will be going on Facebook and saying, hey, I'm doing this thing now over here, come join me there. So where were where were those platforms that you found to do that? And two, do all of your new patrons, what do they call them?
Patrons.
Patrons. Do all of your new patrons come from that network of Patreon, or do they come from external networks? And
Patreon itself does not have a spectacular Discover ecosystem. I think it's something they're really trying to work on. But currently, if you run a Kickstarter, you tend to get a lot of people who are just like cruising around like it's the mall. And I think on Patreon, it's much more like if you go to somebody's page, you're there because it was linked somewhere else on the web. So I think when I first, this is deep history now, so I can't really remember, but I think when I first started it, I must have talked about it most on Twitter, because that was where I had a community of people. But I think identifying, just like with a Kickstarter, right? You're like, okay, what are my resources? I'm part of the XOXO community, which I think is a great resource because there's a ton of really well-connected folks there. And it's a very like generous and enthused community. A lot of people there have day jobs, magical. It's mercenary, but like I have come to be aware of this where I'm like, you can't just have other broke artists for friends because then you're all just passing the same $5 around and like you gotta bring in. I just remember the first Kickstarter I ran, one of my dance acquaintances, not even like a close friend, who I guess worked in software, and I didn't really know any people in 2012 who worked in software, gave like $200 to my campaign, and I just like my brain exploded because I was like, nobody makes that kind of money. Like I don't know what kind of money I thought they were making, but like I've come to understand that salaries are bonkers, and there are a lot of different levels of income that people have. And so for some folks, $200 is just like NBD, and for other people, that's like your whole budget for something for the year. So like that, it's good to identify your different channels. I don't know that I did this, but in the same way that like if you run another Kickstarter campaign, you can message all the backers of a previous campaign just to be like, hey y'all, like if you supported me doing this thing, I'm doing this now over here. If you want to come join me, I think that would totally be a legit thing
that's
to
a
do.
that's a good
thing to message all your backers from your album campaign and be like, if you like my work, this is kind of the next evolution of what I'm up to. Just like with a Kickstarter, you can talk about it until you're blue in the face, and somebody, your aunt, your cousin, whoever, is going to come out of the woodwork and be like, I didn't know you were doing a Patreon. And you're like, I have talked about nothing else for the last 6 months. Like, why will you not pay attention to me?
The algorithms.
Yeah, it's
the algorithms.
Bullshit. It's so frustrating. I think every time you release something too, like if you are in the habit, I know when I first started out, and I don't know how well this works. Again, I have no data for like conversion metrics or whatever, which I think you can drive yourself mad trying to track all that stuff anyway. But if I released a new comic and posted it on my website or on Medium, I would always put a link at the bottom just being like, if you enjoyed this, you can support me making more stuff on Patreon, or this project was brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. You can sign up here, or to learn more about how this was made, go here. Like I try to funnel people there. I have a big button on the front of my website that's like, support my work, become a Patreon supporter. Over time, I have tried to make it my primary, like this is kind of how I know what is like, this is how I know that Patreon is where I'm primarily pushing all of my creative energy these days, is that I don't link to my own website on social media platforms. You know, like my website is fine as a portfolio space, but it's kind of a ghost town. Like I was just using that blog for, come see me at this event, I'm going to be at this place, come over here, I'm doing this, I have a book coming out, here's this, here's that. And like it felt so much more, that felt tonally appropriate for what my website is. And I think you're totally right that these different containers have different uses, and what we feel like is good for an intimate letter to somebody in a newsletter space would be weird as a blog post, or like might not make sense as a Twitter thread. And I'm still on the fence. I don't know whether it makes any kind of sense to resurrect a blog on my own website versus continuing to write on Patreon. I really don't know. I don't want to make more work for myself. It's kind of where I'm at. I think you're right that there are different environments that are better suited to those things, better or worse suited. And I'm afraid I don't have any answers about which one is the appropriate one to point to. But yeah, well, it's certainly like not being afraid to talk about it to everyone. And just like if you're making stuff, making a lot of stuff available from the beginning, saying like, for the first 6 months of my Patreon, nothing I make is going to be behind a paywall. And then after that, I'm going to start producing some more, or like, that's kind of extreme, but you know what I mean? Like having my friend Sarah Eris does a great thing where periodically she will do Patreon open house, where she will just like temporarily unlock everything. And I don't know what the quickest, if there is a quick and easy way to do that on the back end, there must be. Otherwise, I think it would be a tremendous undertaking. But I've always thought that's a really nice idea. And she'll like post about it on social media a bunch, and then you can go have a taster of what all the different tiers are like. Because it's one thing to read a tier description that's like, every month you get blah, blah. And like, you don't really know what that's like until you've received it. So I think the pusher model of like, first one's free and then you got to pay for him is not a bad idea in an environment like this. But yeah, I'm also a big fan of just like making stuff free for people. Ooh, yeah. Okay, we're at about an hour, which is where I try to cap these conversations so people's eyes don't fall out of their heads.
Yeah, this is so great. Thank you
so much. This is a huge boon for me, because now I have something to share with all of my educational tier people.
This is my hope for how art can be and how community can be, is that it's like a mutually beneficial in relationship.
Yes. And that's really, just genuinely what it feels like. I think if there's one thing to take away from this, is that I have encountered 0 entitled assholes on Patreon. Like they just don't exist in my corner of the world, at least, which I'm very grateful for. And I think that, I meant what I said about it being this sort of like mutual exercise in your patrons are also there to teach you that it's okay to just be the person that you are, figuring out what you're doing at whatever pace you're figuring it out. And they will be there regardless of whether or not you are producing. And that is like the most powerful and important thing. And I think it really has the potential to be, this is woo, but like it has the potential to be healing, right, for everyone involved. And I really do believe in it very strongly. So yeah, I think you should make a page. I think you should tell me where people can find your various places, so that when they're done listening to this and they're like, my God, what an insightful and fascinating person, I want to go give them money right now, they can go do that.
Okay, well, my website is anniebeth.com.
Great.
ANNIEBETH.com, because Bethancourt is just a crazy last name. And then my Instagram, where I do a lot of writing and post a lot of music, is OH Annie Beth, like Annie Beth. Annie Beth. Yeah, and then hopefully I'll have links to Patreon there soon.
Yay. Yeah.